Hello, hello. How are we doing today? Welcome back, everyone. This is David Patrick Carey with Church of the Eternal Logos. And today, I want to talk to you guys about Lucifer, pride, and the evil genius archetype. And so before we get going, I just want to double check, make sure we're good on all the different platforms. It looks like we're coming across clear. Give me a thumbs up over on YouTube. Make sure we're coming across good. Audio's good. It's showing it is on my end at least. So if you guys can throw up a perfect. Yep, we got some thumbs up. All right, audio quality is solid over on YouTube. Looks like we're live also over on D Live. If you guys are interested, I will throw that link over here in the YouTube chat real quick. That is if you guys happen to have a D Live channel, feel free to at least follow me. Not that you have to watch me over there, but always trying to grow the D Live channel. So if you guys are able, just check that link out in the chat. So today, like I said, I want to talk about Lucifer, pride, and the evil genius archetype. There is sort of a wide array of topics we're going to be hitting on, but my goal is to pull a thread through all these different topics and really present a sort of picture that I think is really interesting. And that picture is looking at Lucifer, looking at the fall of Lucifer, looking at the nature of pride itself. What can we glean from Isaiah, from Ezekiel when it discusses the fall of Lucifer, and how would that relate then to the sort of general narrative of the mad scientist, the evil genius archetype that we find over and over and over again, whether it be movies or comics or myths or legends. And so that relates to, as we'll get into Frankenstein, Victor Frankenstein, whether that's Dr. Evil, whether that's Scar from The Lion King or Scarface, all these different Thanos. There's so many different, Lex Luthor, for example, he's another one. There are so many different sort of characters or archetypal figures that represent what I'm going to highlight is really a sort of archetypal, sort of primal structure that I think we find in Lucifer himself. And so I'll be going over the type of villain archetypes. And so there's kind of four main villain archetypes that I'm going to highlight, and that is the false donor, that is the beast, the authority figure, and the traitor. And so we're going to speak more about those different archetypes in themselves, the villain archetype, but the general structure of today's today's live stream is really we're going to begin with the Lucifer's fall. We're going to look in Ezekiel chapter 28, beginning with verse 11, and there's a specific section there that is going to be describing the fall of Lucifer. And then there's a debated section in Isaiah chapter 14, whether, are we talking about the Babylonian king, or are we talking about Satan, or are we talking about both, that the Babylonian king is really just a puppet for Satan. But there's a couple verses there in Isaiah chapter 14, verses 12 through 16. We're going to read those as well. And that's going to set our launching point, as we always do, a sort of biblical launch pad, to look at pride. And pride is going to be the sort of central theme of, again, today's video, but that is really part and parcel of Lucifer's fall in general, is pride. And so pride being the sort of father of all major sins. Now in Orthodoxy, we don't have that sort of seven deadly sin, same structure as the Catholics do, which actually comes from, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, I believe it's Evagrius Ponticus, who actually sort of developed the seven deadly sins. I think that they've been changed. There's one of them that was changed. Evagrius had a different one, and Catholic tradition ended up substituting. But anyways, we don't actually hold to that same structure in Orthodoxy. But pride we would recognize as really sort of the ultimate sin, because all other sins sort of break off their branches of sin or of pride in and of itself, one way or another. And so if you want to learn a little bit more, you could even go to like the Ortho Wiki page that talks about pride. It's really it's going to be hitting on a lot of the same stuff that I'm trying to say right now, and that really a lot of the sin, a lot of our sort of bad behaviors, our addictions, in one way or another, it's really tied to a sort of idea of pride. And this is why in Orthodoxy, this is why in Christianity, generally speaking, being humble is so important, because as soon as we become unhumble, as soon as we become prideful or egotistic, that's how we fall into major problems, major errors. And so from talking about Lucifer and his fall and reading a little bit of scripture, then we're going to get into a more general discussion on pride. We're looking at a few different Bible verses, and then we'll be looking at, what are archetypes? Just real brief. We're not going to be diving too deep. I'm not, this video isn't a lecture on Jungian psychology or anything like that, but we're just going to be addressing, okay, what is an archetype? What's the difference between a sort of Platonic form and maybe a sort of Jungian psychological emphasis? So we're going to be highlighting that and then getting into our discussion on evil geniuses and mad scientists, generally speaking, some common characteristics. I have a really interesting study from the UK that I want to share with you guys, talking about movies between the 1930s and the 1980s. And I think there's about 1,000 movies in the study, and they begin to talk about how many of these movies have the scientist as the sort of evil villain, and then how many have the scientist as a hero. And I think it's actually really eye-opening and interesting. We'll be getting into that. Then we'll be getting into the villain archetypes, and that's really going to conclude our video. And again, the idea is to show that the fall of Lucifer, the emphasis of pride, the worship of oneself, which of course Lucifer does, and wanting to usurp God and usurp his kingdom and domain in heaven and all creation and all eternity, is part and parcel of the evil genius, the mad scientist, who wants a lot of these same things. And so that is the goal today, is try to highlight and bring a thread through all these different topics. So before I get into anything much deeper, I do want to do a little bit of selfless promotion, and that is, if you guys are interested and you enjoy what's going on this YouTube channel, I would greatly appreciate it if you guys could go to davidpatrickcarey.com or churchoftheeternallogos.com and potentially set something up monthly. In the top right-hand corner, there's a donate button, and in that donate button, you can set up maybe a $5 monthly payment, and that $5 monthly payment will automatically get you a website membership, which is expecting to be rolling out here in the next week or two. Again, we're still building things out. It's not exactly an immediate process for sure, but a lot of these streams, we're going to be doing half of them on YouTube. The other half are going to be over on the website. And so if you want to hear conversations with me and made by Jim Bob or me and Jay Dyer or the Norwegian News, half those are going to be for free. Half those are going to be on DLive, on YouTube, on Periscope. But if you want the second half, those are going to be for website members only. And so if you sign up today for $5 a month or anything greater, if you're able to and you appreciate what we're doing, that will automatically get you a website membership. So when that rolls out in the next week or two, you will automatically have an account, and you can just roll right on over to the website when we're streaming and pick up that second half. Or you can watch the whole stream over there on the website. We'll be doing all that stuff. So if that sounds like something you'd be interested in, I would greatly appreciate you guys heading over to the website, davidpatrickcarey.com, churchoftheeternallogos.com, and setting something up. I'd really appreciate that. So just a coffee a month, but it would mean a lot to me. So with that being said, now let's get into today's topic. We are looking at the fall of Lucifer to begin. And so the fall of Lucifer is all in regards to Lucifer trying to usurp God and his power, correct? And so Lucifer became so impressed with his own beauty. Of course, he was the most beautiful angel, right? He was the most beautiful angel. He was so impressed with his own intelligence, with his own power, with his own position, that he began to desire for himself the same honor and glory that belongs specifically to God. And this, as we can see, this is going to be reminiscent of what we're going to see, at least in my opinion, my argumentation of some of the evil genius, some of the mad scientist archetypes, is that they themselves are going to begin to fall into the same archetypal pattern about sort of, well, in one way or another, it really is a sort of self-worship. You can be impressed, we could say that one's impressed with oneself, but really, as I want to highlight with some of these evil geniuses, that the drive to sort of become God, again, we're going to be talking about Frankenstein here in a little bit, but just to, you could take Frankenstein, the idea of creating life, right? Taking something that's dead and making it alive, not due to God, not due to prayer, not due to purity or righteousness or repentance, but due to sort of techne, science, rationalism, egotism, the manipulation of matter itself, which if Lucifer fell, as we're going to be talking about today, and believe that he absolutely did, that is what he's going to be using for his power, for his usurpation, for his dominion on this planet. Is certainly going to be technology. And so this is an idea that I put forward in a previous stream on technology, the Tower of Babel, and what we're seeing in the modern world right now in regards to globalism, the technocracy, that's being instituted and established worldwide, a sort of centralization of power, right? So all these things, I think, tie together. And so the mad scientist, the evil genius, they are part and parcel of the same sentiment that I think Lucifer is going to embody in eternity himself, right? Because when he falls in eternity. And these being impressed with oneself, with one's beauty. And so when we look at today's society, look at selfie culture, look at social media, look at, again, the sort of narcissism, the solipsism, the self-worship that is rampant across our culture, I think Lucifer's fall and why he fell, and then looking at our own culture, leads us easily to say our own culture is quite fallen. And so this is something we need to keep in mind in regards to being overly impressed with oneself, essentially over-validating or end up worshiping those qualities, and then becoming that archetypal figure who believes himself to be God, begins to transcend and cross defined boundaries. Okay, so first passage then that I wanted to discuss is Ezekiel. And this is chapter 28. We'll be beginning with verse 11, Ezekiel chapter 8, verse 11. And this is regarding the king of Tyre as being overthrown. And verse 11 begins like this. Again, the word of the Lord came to me, saying, Son of man, take up your lamentation for the ruler of Tyre, and say to him, Thus says the Lord and Master, you are a seal of resemblance and crown of beauty. You are the luxury of the paradise of God, adorned with every good stone, sardius, topaz, emerald, and diamond, sapphire, jasper, silver, and gold, stone of Liguria, agate, amethyst, chrysolite, beryl, and onyx. You are filled with treasuries, and your storehouses with gold from the very day you were created. I appointed you to be with the cherub. I set you on the holy mountain of God. You were in the midst of the stones of fire. You were blameless in your days from the day you were created, until wrongs were found in you. By the abundance of your trade, you filled your secret rooms with lawlessness. Thus you sinned. So you were cast wounded from the mountain of God, and the cherub brought you out from the midst of the stones of fire. Your heart was lifted up because your beauty, your knowledge was corrupted with your beauty. Because of the multitude of your sins, I cast you to the ground. Before kings, I set you forth as an example. Because of the multitude of your sins and the wrongdoings of your trade, you desecrated your sanctuaries. Therefore, I will bring fire from your midst, which will devour you, to turn you into ashes upon your land in the sight of all who see you. All who know you among the nations shall groan over you. You destroyed yourself, and you shall be present no more forever. And so this little section here is believed to be talking about the fall of Lucifer himself. And the key point that I want to highlight is that your heart was lifted up because of your beauty. Your knowledge was corrupted because of your beauty. And if you actually look at some of the translation, this is coming from the Orthodox Study Bible. They have a little bit of a different description of this verse, but the idea is that he was essentially worshiping his own beauty, worshiping his own knowledge, worshiping his own intelligence, and this led to a sort of feedback loop, a sort of process of falling. Of course, within all this, he wanted to supplant God and replace God and usurp God's dominion and his kingdom. So there's a lot going on here, but for anybody to want to do that in the first place, you'd have to be awfully prideful. You'd have to think awfully highly of yourself to want to usurp God, usurp the creator of all creation. And that's exactly what Satan wanted to do. And so, just quickly, because the other popular verse that kind of talks about this is in Isaiah chapter 14. We're going to be looking at chapter 14, verse 12 through 16. Chapter 14 through 12 through 16. And it reads, this is in Isaiah, "How you are fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, who rose up in the morning. He who sins for all the nations is crushed to the earth. For you said in your mind, I will ascend to heaven. I will place my throne above the stars of heaven. I will sit on the lofty mountain towards the north. I will ascend above the clouds. I will be like the Most High. But now you shall descend to Hades, to the foundations of the earth. Those who see you will marvel at you, and they will say, this is the man who greatly upset the earth, who shook kingdoms, and who made all the inhabited world a desert. He destroyed its cities, and did not set free those in captivity. All the kings of the nations sleep in honor, every man in the house. But you shall be cast forth on the mountains like a loathsome dead person, with many dead pierced with swords, who go down into Hades. And as a garment defiled in blood, you will not be clean." And so, again, we see the description of Satan talking about how he wants to, I will place my throne above the stars of heaven. I will ascend to heaven. I will sit on the lofty mountain. I will ascend above the clouds. I will be like the Most High. So again, we see this prideful, arrogant, narcissistic, almost maybe solipsistic, depending on how you want to look at it, but certainly a narcissistic, over egotistical individual with a lot of pride. And I think this is really interesting, and certainly it indicates the personhood of Lucifer. One of which, this is something that I actually wanted to share with you guys, is something that I found earlier today. I forgot to upload it, so let me pull it up real quick. It has to do with Pope Francis. Of course, we're certainly not the biggest fans of him, but he was talking about how Satan is a very smart person and you should not argue with him. And this is from an article over in the UK, but it was Pope Francis did some type of interview. I forget what it was, but he was actually fairly consistent in talking about how Satan is an individual. He is a person, and that he is incredibly intelligent, incredibly witty, and that you should not engage in conversation with him. So that, I think, is going to, again, tie into the archetype of the evil genius and maybe what they're tapped into at a spiritual level, whether conscious of it or not, whether they're atheistic or not, that there is a sort of self-grandizement, wanting to usurp God and be God in a multitude of ways, and then beginning to transgress moral, ethical boundaries that we would typically say are upheld due to God and by God. So I just wanted to throw that in there. I thought it was interesting. But related to the passages we had just read, pride, again, is the central force of Lucifer's fall and is the origination of sin itself. Right? I mean, normally we talk about the fall, we talk about Adam, of course, we talk about Adam, but sin itself as like its sort of own category really comes into existence with the transgressions of Lucifer, because it's Lucifer using his free will. Of course, this is occurring in eternity, but using his free will goes in opposition to God. And so Lucifer then is banished from heaven. Again, we see this in Isaiah chapter 14, verse 12, which we just read. And this is where his name changes. So, again, we've mentioned this before, but as Lucifer was the morning star, Lucifer, Lucius, related to light, all this stuff, Lucifer's name then is changed. It's no longer Lucifer, but it actually gets changed to Satan. And so upon his fall, he becomes Satan, the adversary. And so his power becomes perverted. This is another thing where, we've talked about before that Satan was given, well, he's Lucifer at the time, but he was given dominion over creation. He had dominion over it. And this was before he fell. And of course, then he falls and he's sort of relegated to that dominion, that area in which he had power. But then again, when death is defeated by death in Jesus Christ and the incarnation of the Logos, that within our theology, he now doesn't have that same power, that same stranglehold over death that he once held. And so that's interesting, certainly. And then he becomes destined to be bound for 1,000 years. This is a reference to Revelation chapter 20, verse 3. And eventually, it is believed that Satan will be thrown into the lake of fire. That is a reference to Matthew chapter 25, verse 41. And so all this is to say that, again, pride is going to be the central thrust of the sort of Luciferian self-aggrandizement, self-worship, apotheosis that we are talking about today, that I believe, and I'm arguing, is consistent within various mad scientists, archetypes, evil geniuses, stuff like that. And so there's a few things that I wanted to say about pride before going too much further. And so some of that would be related. Hold on, let me just make sure everything is going good in the chat. Looks like everything's going good here. How are we over on D Live and everything? Okay. Looks like we're going pretty good. We're solid. So, continuing on. There's a few things that I wanted to say about pride. And so, like I said, pride is probably the grandfather of all sin. But what are some of the verses? What does the Bible say about pride specifically? And so I just grabbed a handful here that I want to read to you guys. And so the first one is Galatians chapter 6, verse 4. Each one should test their own actions. Then they can take pride in themselves alone without comparing themselves to someone else. And that, I started with that one because I think today's video, again, this sort of larger demonization of pride itself in a generalistic context really needs a sort of nuanced live stream or video to talk about then the necessity and where in our lives should we take pride. Because being prideful can't always be entirely negative. Taking pride in your work, taking pride in your piety, taking pride in your life, taking pride in your family, taking pride in your body, in your fitness, your health. Of course, these should never take ultimate value. That would be a major, major setback and detriment. But I think there is a conversation. There's a I think maybe in the future there should be a stream worth talking about. Is how do we navigate pride? How do you live a sort of proud Christian life without being prideful or overly prideful that would lead to a sinful disposition, if you will. So I think that would need another stream. We're not going to get into that too much today, but we see in James chapter 4, verse 6, but he gives us more grace. That is why Scripture says, God opposes the proud, but shows favor to the humble. Shows favor to the humble. And there's there's a few things here that I also wanted to say. I kind of planned on saying this more later in the stream, but even the difference between sort of humbleness is sort of opening up, if you will. I mean, I don't think of humbleness and depression as the same thing. I don't see a humble person with their face to the ground, kicking rocks with their hands in their pockets while they're walking down the sidewalk. But I think my personal mind or image in my mind is a humble person is one who is really sort of looking up to God. And so pride, though you may walk in a prideful way with your head up and your chest out, really when you are living in that sort of sinful state of pride, it's really a severing of the humbleness in which you are reverential and respectful and sort of obedient to the power of God upstairs, as opposed to the pride. It sort of allows your worldview to be severed to creation alone, right? And so then easily moving into a sort of self-worshiping of man as God, apotheosis, all this different stuff. But I digress. And so James chapter 4 verse 10 says, "Humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will lift you up." Jeremiah chapter 9 verse 23, "This is what the Lord says, let not the wise boast of their wisdom, or the strong boast of their strength, or the rich boast of their riches." Philippians chapter 2 verse 3, "Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, rather in humility value others above yourselves." Very different, very difficult for sure. Proverbs chapter 8 verse 13, "To fear the Lord is to hate evil. I hate pride and arrogance, evil behavior, and perverse speech." That was Proverbs 8. Proverbs 11, chapter 2, "When pride comes, then comes disgrace, but with humility comes wisdom." Proverbs chapter 13, verse 12, "Where there is strife, there is pride, but wisdom is found in those who take advice." Those who take advice. Proverbs chapter 16, verse 5, "The Lord detests all the proud of heart. Be sure of this, they will not go unpunished." And then Proverbs chapter 16, verse 18, "Pride goes before destruction, a haughty spirit before a fall." And I could go on and on and on in regards to pride, how we understand pride. You know, Proverbs chapter 29, verse 23, "Pride brings a person low, but the lowly in spirit gain honor." And so I really love that pride brings a person low, but lowly in spirit gain honor. And so this problem with pride and fall, I think we've already discussed Lucifer, but another sort of interesting angle, and I mentioned this previously in streams, is I think looking at Adam and Eve. So Adam and Eve, of course, the original sin, the same sin of Lucifer wanting to usurp and become God, be like God. He tries to do this. He's, eternally, he has eternal consequences due to that, for sure. But when we look at Eve being tricked by the serpent to do the exact same sin as he did, there's a sense of pride in wanting to be able to see like God, see the difference between good and evil. But then once it's happened, once they notice that they're naked and Adam and Eve are both covering themselves and God begins looking for them in the garden, I think it's very interesting to note that, and I've read this in different Orthodox books, I think this was in Losky in the Mystical Theology of the Eastern Church, talking about how pride and the inability to take responsibility for one's transgressions and instead sort of pushing that onto somebody else, Adam onto Eve, Eve onto the serpent, is tied to the fall. Is that when it talks about how pride will bring you low, pride brought Lucifer really low. It took him out of heaven. Pride brought humanity, Adam and Eve, really low. It took him, out of the sort of, the sort of adolescent state they were supposed to be in, and then grow from there, eating from the tree. Not that the tree was evil in of itself, or they could never be eaten of. It's that the adolescent state in which they were in, they were not supposed to partake of. So pride making us low, taking us lowly. I think this is a very interesting idea we can look at, and I think it relates absolutely to Adam and Eve and their relationship to pride and their inability to take responsibility for their transgressions. So pride lowers a person, and it leads somebody to have admiration for their self, which again is lowly. So the pride, to be prideful, you're revalidating, you're admiring yourself, your own self, and by doing that, the focus is back on yourself. That's what I mean, is like you're so focused on creation, you can't even look up and recognize the transcendent. You can't recognize the transcendent, and so pride blinds us. Not just that it's a sinful thing, but literally the direction, the intentionality of pride blinds us to look beyond it, to the heavens, to God, because we're so focused on ourselves. Pride is the lamp of the wicked. This is a phrase that I saw doing some preparation for this video. Some Orthodox were talking about pride is the lamp of the wicked. And I love that idea. So if we really look at this sort of symbolism of that statement, pride is the lamp of the wicked, is what is our lamp? What is our light? Certainly that would be Christ, right? The Logos, Jesus Christ. So if he's our light, we don't walk around with a lamp. We don't need these other forms because Christ will guide our path. He will light our way. He is the way. He is the truth, and he is the life. So those who are deep into this sort of archetypal Luciferian pattern that then plays itself out, as I'm saying, in the evil genius and the mad scientist, their lamp is their own pride. And so whether it be their own reason, their own belief in their own beauty, their belief in their own capabilities or their own power or their own whatever it is, knowledge, reason, whatever, that they that is the light in which that lamps lights their world. That is the lamp, that is the light in their worldview. And so it makes sense then that only is going to revalidate the self-worship, right? Think about it. If pride and you taking pride in yourself and your abilities, your ability to read, your ability to write, your ability to speak, do whatever it is, and say you become really good at it. Like it's objectively clear that you have a skill and you're good at something, and you just continue to go in that pattern. Yes, you may move up in the world. You may gain various attributes in the world, but ultimately it just leads back to one's self. And your light, your orientation, your ability to perceive the world is entirely due to these little skills, these minor abilities that you've acquired over time. That is very different than being able to see a larger phenomenon, a larger perspective of the world that one would have if they were rooted more in a sort of Christ understanding or Christian understanding of the light in Jesus Christ. So I think there's just so many ways to look at this, and it makes sense in so many different ways. That's why, even though I don't like the sort of Jordan Peterson focus on archetypes and sort of over psychological, putting too much of a psychological emphasis on things, putting too much on a sort of utilitarian, mythical, semiotic, symbolic form of why things are useful and good. I'm not trying to do that, but I'm saying that those all exist because approaching this video, well, I'll say this next here in a second. So, true wisdom from an Orthodox and from a Christian perspective, generally speaking, true wisdom is incompatible with pride. True wisdom is incompatible with pride. True wisdom is embodied in the figure of Jesus Christ. So I think that's a really interesting idea. Again, it separates wisdom from knowledge because with again, the mad scientist, the evil genius, they have a lot of knowledge. But do they have wisdom? Is there a difference between wisdom and knowledge? And from a biblical standpoint, we would say they may have tons of knowledge, and they may be very prideful due to the amount of knowledge that they have. But that does not make them wise. And in fact, within biblical wisdom, there is no pride. There is no use for pride because pride would contradict what wisdom is pointing towards, ultimately towards God, which then is all about a humbling process. So it's all about humility then, as opposed to pride. Because wisdom, ultimately, in the various forms you're going to acquire it, is going to point to you becoming more and more humble. And so I have to say, again, these lectures or these live streams or whatever, they're for myself just as much as anybody else. And so I couldn't help but thinking about all the ways in which I'm prideful, in which I'm proud. And that's why I think eventually I will do a more nuanced conversation on pride. Maybe I'll have somebody more versed in Orthodox theology than I to discuss pride. Because certainly there's a balancing act here. I know I can always work on it. I know I get caught up in, myself or my world or my activities or what I'm trying to do and maybe lose sight of ultimate focus. But, I'm as proud as anybody else. And to get to sit in front of a camera like I'm doing and trying to talk to you or convey an idea which I think is worth conveying, it takes a certain amount of pride, a pride in which I think I have something to say, or a pride to the fact that I think that I can say it to you. So towing the sort of line between being sinfully prideful and then being prideful in a way which allows you to have a backbone and represent yourself well in the world, I think there's a whole conversation that needs to be had there. And so when I'm talking about pride or anything, if it feels like, oh, well, that stings a bit, that kind of sounds like me, that sounds like me too. I'm right there with you. I am no better than any single person watching this, or so. No matter what your habits or your sinful problems are, I'm right there with you. So, true wisdom is incompatible with pride. Proud men boast about things and not virtues. This I thought was really insightful. Think about this. Proud men boast about things and not virtues, because from a Christian worldview, what are the things that you should be proud of? Should you be proud of worldly things? Should you be proud about your career, about your income, about your car, even about things that are more meaningful, maybe about your health, maybe about your family, your wife, your children? I mean, these are beautiful things that have deep meaning that are given to you by God, a wife and children, a family. But we have to find that balancing act. And so I thought it was so beautiful when I found online Orthodoxy talking about how proud men boast about things and not about virtues, because us as Christians, what we should be valuing are virtues. And if we were to brag about ourselves, that should be what we're bragging. Of course, we don't. We shouldn't be bragging at all. We shouldn't be overly boastful at all, of course. But the point trying to be made that is, if we were going to, what is the scale for something to be bragged about in our worldview, if we're taking it seriously? That would then be virtues. We would brag about how honest we are. We would brag about how punctual we are. We'd brag about, how respectful we are, or all these things, how pious we are. Maybe again, we shouldn't brag about those. I'm not telling anybody to, but I'm saying that it's very interesting from this standpoint, because once I started to think about it, you can't not see that prideful people boast about things and not about virtues. And that's true with me, again, as anybody else. So what does that insinuate? That a prideful person is more about the control and dominion over things, such as world domination. So when we look at then this archetype, what do they want? What does the villain archetype want? What if they're like a James Bond character with all these different revenue streams? Maybe they're millionaires, maybe they're scientists, or they're expert engineers or inventors or whatever it is. But they're all interested in a sort of control and dominion over something created, something within creation. And so again, proud men boast about things, not about virtue. And so that idea that proud men, prideful men that are going to fall into this Luciferian archetype that we're trying to discuss today, they're going to be much more interested in the control of things, the dominion of things, like the dominion of the world, the domination of the world. So just wanted to throw that out there. And so somebody mentioned, hey, where did you get your thumbnail for today's video? My thumbnail comes from Art promoting the new computer game Evil Genius, or maybe Evil Geniuses, I forget. But the second version of this game is coming out this year in 2020. And so that is what I took my thumbnail from. Some of you guys may have noticed that, or some of you may not. But the whole point of the game is world domination. And so it's a fun game, very popular apparently. Obviously, they wouldn't make a second one. But that hits exactly with what I'm trying to talk about today, in regards to what I just said with the pride or the evil genius wanting to take control and have dominion over created things. The game Evil Genius, or Evil Geniuses, I forget, is literally about world domination. And that's going to be true with a lot of the archetypal figures that we're talking about. And so if you look at my thumbnail today, he's got a little moniker like the Monopoly guy, and he's got a scar over his left eye. This, I thought, was a perfect entry point then to talk about archetypes, just briefly, but about face scars. Think about how many evil villains you see with face scars or disfigurement. So disfigurements, generally speaking, is a way to represent evil. because evil disfigures the order of God itself. So usually, if we didn't live in such an inverted time as we live in now, usually beauty has an objective structure, organization, and aesthetic. That's why we think it's beautiful. That's why it's objectively beautiful, even across cultures, usually. Not always, but usually. And so the disfigurement of individuals, the scarring of one's face, is a way to symbolize them not participating in that sort of order, that God's destined, ordained, providential order for creation himself, the order that the Logos substantiates. So, hey guys, if you haven't, please like this video. For those who have joined, please smash that like. I would greatly appreciate that. It helps with the algorithms, as I always say. But if you haven't, I would greatly appreciate that. So you look at, again, the figure on my thumbnail, who's the sort of part of the Evil Geniuses or Evil Genius video game. But look at Scar from The Lion King. Same idea. Scar has the scar across his eye. And then let's look at the semiotics of Lion King. Scar betrays his brother, the rightful king, who's competent, who takes care of, who provides, who is protector of. He betrays him. He stabs him in the back, so to say. Of course, really sort of stabs him in the paws. But Mufasa is killed. He takes over that kingdom. And it isn't until the son of Mufasa comes back and then restores that kingdom back to the way and the harmony it's supposed to be. Well, you can see a sort of patterning of Christ himself, of Mufasa, just at a symbolic level, generally speaking, representing God, God being betrayed, if you will, by Scar. Of course, they're not brothers, but Scar then representing sort of the fallen nature of Lucifer, Lucifer having full dominion over the fallen realm, and then by the incarnation of Christ and Christ defeating death by death, then we see that entire realm collapsing, and he no longer has full dominion over that realm. So again, our deep, meaningful and archetypal patterns. We can see that even in The Lion King right there. Again, related to what we're talking about today. Again, even symbolized with the same scarring of the evil genius. Scarface, the movie with Al Pacino. Scar. Now, I'm not going to get into any biblical interpretations of Scarface, but we see a similar pattern, at least within the portrayal of movies. Darth Vader. Kylo Ren, both sort of evil characters in the Star Wars series, both of which have facial scars. Thanos has facial scars. You know, an obvious one that's kind of funny is Dr. Evil, played by Mike Myers in the Austin Powers series. And he actually comes from, so the whole spirit, the whole inspiration for Dr. Evil comes from Ernest Stavro Blofeld from the James Bond movie You Only Live Twice. So if you guys looked up You Only Live Twice, the James Bond movie, you would see the evil villain there. That is who that is who Dr. Evil was trying to mock in a sort of comical fashion. But it's perfect because, again, look at, the discussion on Dr. Evil is going to fit perfect in regards to what I'm talking about. The evil genius, the mad scientist. He wants world domination, had a poor relationship with his father, and that's ultimately God the Father, right? So whatever, you want to look at, again, I know it's a comical movie, Austin Powers, but the patterns, I think, are important. So even Dr. Evil, as funny as nonsensical it is that I'm talking about that, has a bad relationship with his father, wants to then act out and show everybody in the world who he really is by becoming this evil genius. He's gifted intellectually, right? I believe in the Austin Powers series, he finished first in his class, and now he's wanting to dominate the world, show the world. And so even like the whole joking about, his spaceship, taking the shape of a sort of phallic structure, again, trying to usurp and become that ultimate male archetype, really the evil genius, right? Because it's about them becoming God. So we can even see that in Dr. Evil. But what are archetypes? We talk about archetypes. What are archetypes? And so I wanted to just briefly say this before we got into what I wanted to say in regards to the archetypal structure of the evil genius and the mad scientist, is that what are archetypes? And I think there's three things that need to be highlighted. That when we say archetypes, usually we're talking about, I think most people I come in conversation with are really talking about, in a way, all three of these, but probably haven't really thought it out entirely in regards to the differences between them. So the first one is when most people say archetypes, they even use it in regards to like geometry or mathematics or sacred geometry is what I'm talking about. Well, that is not the Jungian psychology. That is not Jungian archetypal theory, both of which are a little bit different. That is Platonic forms. And so that's a different kind of archetype. Not that I disagree. I absolutely agree. Of course, I just say that all comes from the Logos. As a Christian, that we have no problems with archetypes. It's just that archetypes aren't developed in the psyche of individuals or appear within mythologies due to evolutionary patterns, and somehow these being the fittest ways and being ingrained, in the repressed unconscious of individuals that then express itself through art and symbolism. No, it's that these archetypes are real. These archetypes exist in the mind of God, the Logos. They exist in the Logos. That's how I look at it. So when I look at number theory or mathematics or laws of logic, all these uncreated energies, I say archetypes are one of those uncreated energies. But when we say archetypes, it includes a lot of different stuff, and that's what I wanted to unpack. So the first one is the concept of forms. That a lot of people, when they speak of archetypes, they are kind of speaking of the Platonic understanding of forms. Forms rooted them in the demiurgic Logos, because Logos isn't God within the Platonic scheme. In the Platonic scheme, we're going to have a dualism between matter and the immaterialism. So there's a animosity, there's a tension here. I wouldn't say animosity because it's not living, but there is a inherent tension between the spiritualized higher forms of immateriality versus the gross, mundane, monotonous physical forms that sort of bring us down. They lower us. And so when you see Gnosticism, when you see Hermeticism, when you see Platonism or Neoplatonism, and you see the adversarial relationship they have towards matter or the body, we don't have that in Christianity. Our God incarnated in flesh, 100% God, 100% man. So we should have a totally different understanding of matter than maybe those schemas. But archetypes, we think of geometric forms, Platonic solids, all these things would be forms or archetypes from the Logos. Agreed. But then there's two forms of Jungian archetypes that also need to be differentiated. One being the collectively recurring symbol or motif in literature, art, and myths within the individual psyche. So the two differentiations within Jungian use of archetypes is one, the psychological emphasis. So for Jung, primarily, archetypes are psychic patterns of the unconscious, of the collective unconscious, okay? So the collectively, at an unconscious level, reoccurring symbols or motifs in literature, art, and myths that are psychological archetypes, psychological in nature. The third, or the second type of Jungian category that needs to be just differentiated within when we say Jungian archetypes, there's the Jungian psychology. That's what I just said. The emphasis on the mental patterns. Because Jung's theory, if you really take his theory, he's not saying the same thing I'm saying. He's not saying the same thing Plato's saying. Jung is saying that the reason why all these patterns exist within myths and stories is because they exist primarily in the psyche. I'm saying they exist primarily in the Logos, and therefore they have a presence within the psyche because we're made in God's image and have a mind, free will, language, and participate in all these different things, all these activities. They are present in the psyche, and they're also present within culture itself. So it's a little bit of different emphasis, different focus, but Jung also talks about constantly recurring symbol or motifs across cultures, art, and myth. So for Jung, there's a distinction between the pattern in the psyche and then the pattern if you do the sort of Joseph Campbell comparative religious analysis of mythology or art or whatever it is, right? Joseph Campbell, I'm sure some of you guys are aware, The Hero's Journey, what is it? Something about 1,000 Masks or something, talking about God. I forget the name of one of those books. Both those books are very prominent Joseph Campbell books. Joseph Campbell was a sort of perennialist, very much interested in world mythology and talking about, well, approaching it is almost specifically in a Jungian context and looking for the crossovers, the patterns, the overlaps between various myths, religions, and spiritual traditions. So those are the three forms of archetypes that most people, I think, blend together. So they say archetypes, and it's not wrong to do that, but I think it's just useful to then enunciate and specify and sort of separate these three groups out, is that you have the Platonic archetypes, meaning of a sort of geometric structure. There's an objective reality to the archetype, right? This is Platonic forms. This is Platonic solids. This is sacred geometry. This is how we would establish a sort of metaphysics for aesthetics and beauty and stuff like that. So there's a objective archetypal structure to reality. That is Plato. And then you have Jung's archetypes, where the archetype is now rooted specifically within the psyche. Now, what is the psyche? Well, we're talking about the collective unconscious part of the psyche, that there is a part of the psyche that unifies all of human nature, and it's filled with the nightmares. Well, it's haunted by the nightmares, and it's illuminated by the dreams of our species, right? And that this then enacts itself through dream analysis, through mythology, through stories, through religion, and all this stuff. This would be Jung's general archetypal theory, which then leads into the more anthropological, or what would be called Jungian archetypal theory, as opposed to Jungian psychology. So the second one was Jungian psychology. This one, looking at the myths across culture, the more objective way, that's going to be Jungian archetypal theory. So those are the three forms or three dimensions of archetypes that I think most people are on board with, but they don't consciously specify or kind of spell all that stuff out. So this leads us then to talk about the evil genius and the mad scientist, and how are they fitting a characteristic or an archetype or a pattern very symbolic to that of the fallen Lucifer. How does that doesn't make sense. Well, it does. And so what are some of the general characteristics of an evil genius, of a mad scientist, if you will? And one of them, the first one, of course, is that they're of great intelligence. They're in great intelligence. And of course, we see this with Lucifer himself, right? We saw that in Isaiah, and how his own knowledge was corrupted, that he was so impressed with his own beauty, his own knowledge, his own intelligence, his own power, that he began to exude the honor and glory that should be directed only towards God, towards himself. And so Lucifer himself has great intelligence, and that, I think, is the first characteristic of the mad scientist or the evil genius, is that they have great intelligence. And I think the great intelligence leads to the obvious sort of self-worship, because a lot of people aren't going to be on that same level. And that's why, again, we always have to be humble to not fall victim to that, of that sort of self-worshiping just because you've read certain books, you know, this or that. That we don't want to fall into that prideful habit. But first characters, they usually have great intelligence. The second one is that they're often mad or insane. So even if you think of some of the Bond villains who maybe live in immense mansions, have a lot of wealth, present themselves as maybe playboys, very luxurious figures, that what their ultimate intentions are still insane. And that insanity is an inversion, you see. So we've talked about the difference between Luciferianism and Satanism. Luciferian is a Promethean, illuministic, enlightenment type of spirituality and spiritual tradition, about a sort of self-worship of oneself, that ultimately you are God. We've talked about Alan Watts, all this different stuff. That's Luciferian, where Satanism is just the complete inversion of the Christian world. Usually they take Catholicism and invert that. So that's why they have the Black Mass as an inversion of the Latin Mass, all traditional Latin Mass, I should say. But that is the difference between Luciferian and Satanism. However, in these figures, in the evil genius or the mad scientist, they're often mad or insane. And I thought this was interesting to look at the insanity of these individuals that are incredibly intelligent as an inversion. So instead of using that intelligence to acquiesce to and understand the order that God has established in creation, they use that intelligence to invert right? And ultimately get whatever they want. And usually that's world domination, corporate domination, destroy this person, revenge of this person, this or that. So I think right there, it's very interesting that them being often mad or insane is an inversion immediately, which would be tied to the sort of Luciferian Satanism. They're usually always extremely ambitious, And so I ask you, probably nobody was more ambitious than Lucifer, wanting to take heaven from God and usurp his kingdom. Can't really think of anything to be more ambitious than that. If you're just to make something up, you're to make a story up, right? Then you have to be true or have to have some sort of theological dimension to it. If you're just to make up a story of the ultimate exercise of ambition, I challenge anybody to outdo Lucifer at the time, of course, he became Satan, his will to usurp God in heaven and his kingdom. So most evil geniuses are extremely ambitious. Most are comfortable crossing taboos and moral boundaries. And so we're going to see this in our example with Victor Frankenstein today. But I think this begins to play itself out as we see in society, generally speaking. The crossing of taboos and moral boundaries. We look at a lot of the research going on, whether that be on life extension, on transhumanism, on gender construction. We see how man, really this evil, fallen spirit of Lucifer and Satan himself, that spirit that maybe I'm not using, I don't know, I'll let you guys correct me. If I'm using spirit wrong to talk about the spirit of Satan and Lucifer on this planet that can inhabit individuals, correct me. It seems like that would be right. But the spirit to become God, again, create life. We see the fetal pods coming in. I did a video talking about, I think that was in the technology video, and talking about the Tower of Babel. How just like the Matrix, they're now wanting to take fetuses out of women and then implant them into a plastic pod and allow the babies then to grow within the pod so the woman doesn't have to give birth. I think this is extremely destructive. I think it's obviously satanic. I believe it's absolutely an inversion. And we see how they're using technology, right? Look at Mr. Robotnik, the evil genius in the video game Sonic. Again, he uses technology. He uses robots and machines to enact his evil schemes. This is the realm in which Satan and, Satan, just another name for Lucifer, has dominion over. If he were to establish the satanic one world empire, it would have to be through techne. It'd have to be through technology. It'd have to be through physical material means. And that's exactly what we're seeing. We're seeing how technology then is really just using the yearnings of the sort of magical impulse throughout, as I talked about, the 16th century, most of European history, the sort of magician's desire to manipulate and control society. We see that being utilized within technology itself, the Google, the big tech, the cancel culture, all this stuff. So, the crossing of taboos, I think we see that with, I would say even forms of immunity shot research that's going on the planet right now. Not too fond of. I think all this stuff kind of fits into the evil genius archetype. And so we're talking about comfortable crossing taboos and moral boundaries. Look at somebody like a Gil Bates. Clearly he has some type of skill. Very intelligent, knows a lot about technology, is forward thinking. I mean, I love when Made by Jim Bob, when he talked about how that guy needs a wedgie. He absolutely does. Bill Gates needs a major wedgie. But he's not a sort of dominant, menacing character physically. Of course, I think he has all these intentions deep down inside himself, but he's intelligent. And then how he wants to control the world is through it's through technology. It's through, whether it be Microsoft, this or that. It's totally being consistent then with the whole thing that we're talking about in terms of this inner pattern, this evil genius, this mad scientist. And so they want to play God, tied to being comfortable crossing taboos and moral boundaries, which those boundaries are embodied and created by God. So then when you begin to be comfortable transgressing those taboos and moral boundaries, you then are establishing yourself as God. And that's exactly what they do. And so the last characteristic that I thought of, again, doing the readings and I was kind of looking over this stuff, is becoming slave. Ultimately, the evil genius or the mad scientist is a slave to power and revenge, if you think about it. So we all submit to something in one way or another, whether that be hedonism, you say God doesn't exist, nothing's important, there is no meaning, truth is relative, and therefore everything is about pleasure. That'd be the sort of hedonistic approach. Well, then hedonism takes ultimate value. So we all have these sort of ultimate value structures. And for us Christians, we would say that the goal of, to be free, you have to be a bondservant to Christ. Again, it's a contradiction, it's a paradox, it doesn't make a lot of sense, but essentially we're saying that you have to be a slave to God to have freedom in this world. And I've talked about this before multiple times, that's exactly the case, is that if you aren't living morally, and so we've talked about Jocko Willink and his phrase, discipline equals freedom, that is the exact same concept, that being a slave to God is what gives a person freedom. And if you aren't a slave to God, you're going to become a slave to something. And it's usually going to be some type of sinful behavior, probably rooted in pride, as we've been talking about. But for the evil genius, it's always about power and revenge. And because that's ultimately what it's about. So the world domination. And that's what's so funny about this stuff is if you look at, and I've said this in multiple streams, somebody like a Michel Foucault with his power knowledge theory, that knowledge is a form of power, and that you have to have power to then establish what is knowledge. And then there's a sort of reverberating feedback loop there of knowledge and power. But knowledge in and of itself is ultimately relativistic because it's the powerful who establish what is true. This is Michel Foucault. I don't believe this. But this leads to them making the argument then that, well, nothing exists besides power, clearly. That power is the ultimate purpose of society. Power is the only objectively true thing there is. Power is what everybody is responding to and fro. It's power. And so everything then is about power. And I think, again, once you've moved away from God, because Michel Foucault was a radical homosexual, he was, sleeping around with young boys in the bathhouses of San Francisco. Not exactly a man you would want your son to grow up to be like. So Michel Foucault ended up dying of AIDS. Surprise, surprise. And so the movement towards these places where they argue where only power exists, there is no objective truth, there is no objective morality. Essentially, again, they're doing away with everything in which a Christian would use to argue the presence and the objective reality of God. They want to do away with in order to argue for the objectivity of power itself. Of course, they already have made the statement that knowledge is relative, so to make an objective claim like that, it's all contradiction. Again, they don't care because it's all about power. And they really do believe that. And so when we look at all the evil geniuses, all the mad scientists, it comes down to power one way or another. Whether it's knowledge, for example, you can look at some of these archetypal figures. Like I was scrolling through like DC Comics, the famous comic villains. And some of them are villains because of their like radical pursuit of knowledge. And so they are totally okay with doing like inhuman experiments, that type of stuff. They're still a slave to power because the idea is that if they know something, they acquire knowledge, they become more powerful. And so whether they're in radical pursuit of real power, like, the sort of playboy villain figure that has all the money and has all the wealth and is still, can't have enough, or they're the mad scientist in the lab coat doing very immoral activities on individuals or children, the sort of almost Nazi-esque experimentation for, again, the pursuit of knowledge. That's still a worship of power. Or you get something like, the Joker in Batman. He's not exactly worshiping power or pursuing power. The Joker is more about pursuing a sort of revenge, a revenge of Batman being who he is and trying to get him to come down a level, right? Get him to kill him, meaning the Joker's trying to get Batman to kill himself, the Joker. So we see then a sort of revenge take over, but it's still, you're ruled by that. You're ruled by that ultimate value. So whatever that value is that you put above yourself that you're ultimately pursuing, be it power or revenge or knowledge or whatever, you're ruled by that. And so we all do that. You can't help but do that. The same thing with the tag argument, the transcendental argument for God, making presuppositional apologetical approaches, is that everybody begins with a presupposition. Everybody begins with an ultimate value system, and somehow there's a value on top of that value structure. The idea being, if that's not God, if God's not the very top of your value hierarchy, your value structure, you can't be free. Because whatever's going to be at the top of your value structure is going to be part of creation. Therefore, it's going to be dualistic, it's going to be fallen, all these different things. You'll never find full satisfaction. You'll never find full freedom. That is only going to be attained in God, becoming slaves of God, as opposed to, as I'm saying, evil geniuses and mad scientists are slaves to power and revenge. And so one of the ways in which I really see this archetype come forth is in Frankenstein. Victor Frankenstein. Victor Frankenstein is well, I think it'd be fair to say that he was Jewish, given his last name. Maybe not. But we know that he was, of Italian-Swiss descent. He was an alchemist and a scientist. Okay, so note that. So Mary Shelley, when she wrote Frankenstein, the Promethean, or the modern Prometheus, that was in 1818. Okay, so we're at the beginning of the 19th century when Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein, the modern Prometheus. Now, who is Prometheus? Of course, most of you guys already know who Prometheus is. Prometheus is the light bringer, right? He's the Greek mythological figure who stole light from Zeus and brought it down to earth, right? He stole the fire, the light of the gods, and brought it to humanity. He's our rescuer. He's our hero. And so that idea of bringing the light, that Prometheus and Lucifer have a very similar description, right? Lucifer, as I said, Lucius, Latin for light. The light bringer, the morning star, right? Of course, that morning star falls as Satan once he's totally rebelled against God and his will. But Victor Frankenstein, I thought it really interesting that he's both an alchemist and a scientist, because literally just a few videos ago, I talked about how, well, in my Hermeticism lecture, on the 16th century being the most magical century within European history, and how I had all these alchemical ideas, these alchemical hermetic yearnings for man and all this stuff, that Victor Frankenstein, and again, I believe most of that stuff to ultimately lead you to a demonic or satanic place. Not that there aren't really interesting things regarding to what Plotinus said, or this right here in the Hermeticism, or look what, Paracelsus did regarding alchemy. Not that there aren't good things in there, but ultimately that worldview leads to a worship of oneself, which is ultimately leads to sin, which ultimately leads to ultimate pride, which ultimately leads to modern Western civilization. Because when you look at how the Renaissance moves into magic, when you look how magic leads into the Reformation, leads into opposition against the magic in regards to science, and then we see the focus on reason, we see the worship of reason in the French Revolution, we see, fast forward 300 years, and we just see absolute narcissism. We see how, I think, I could be wrong, this is my opinion, that the presuppositions of all this stuff have moved us closer and closer and closer towards a culture that is prideful in and of itself. It literally is pride. That's what it sells, right? It sells the Gucci bag. Why? Is that bag better than this bag over here? Is there a quality difference? No. They're literally selling you the brand name, the logo, and you want that. Why? Tied back to the pride. Tied back to the pride. And so I found it very interesting that Victor Frankenstein is both an alchemist, one who is doing these spiritual experimentations by taking this mineral and distilling it and transmuting it and allowing its metamorphosis to occur so then it can be amalgamated and redistilled into its proper, more ideal state, its higher state, its spiritual state. That the alchemist and the scientists, which really are together, Victor Frankenstein almost highlights the sort of unification of two eras, the magical era and then the Enlightenment era. Again, she's writing this in 1818. And then, so what's his project? Victor Frankenstein is taking something that's dead and making it alive. And so Victor Frankenstein, somebody wrapped up in the sort of alchemical magical worldview, who's also enamored with and a professional with science, who is a scientist, can create a monstrosity like Frankenstein, named after himself. Named after himself. Don't you see? The similarities are crazy. Like Satan, Lucifer can't entirely create. He has to mimic and copy and do all this stuff. So, I don't know. I just see a lot there. But we see the crossing of boundaries, the dissolution of the distinction between life and death. That's typically called a psychopomp. Like if you're in like religious studies, if you guys go type in psychopomp, PSCHOPOMP, a psychopomp, you're going to see that's a description for various gods, spirits, entities, and mythology, spirituality, religion, of people who go between the living and the dead, who transgress boundaries. In fact, Hermes, in regards to the Greek deity who Hermes Trismegistus, the false historical figure, was believed to be related to, he was a psychopomp. He was a mover between realms, a transgressor of boundaries. And so we see that exact same thing in Dr. Victor Frankenstein. And Dr. Victor Frankenstein, again, transgressing these ultimate boundaries that God is in dominion of, not he, Frankenstein. And so this is also echoed in H.G. Wells's book, The Island of Dr. Moreau, where Dr. Moreau lives in a very remote place where he's performing these really outrageous and bombastic experiments where he rearranges animals into hominids, really, hominid forms. You know, when I was in China, some of the grad students were talking about, that were Chinese that were working at the university. Again, we had our sort of Western ethical, really as a sort of Christian ethical lens on, and saying, oh, you know, you can't do this to animals, this, that. And then they started telling us what they actually do right there at the university with monkeys. And it was horrifying. It was horrifying. The total lack and appreciation of life, of things that are living, was astounding in China, and how universities do their research, generally speaking. Well, shoot, when I was in Beijing, sorry, this is a bit of a side note, a bit of a tangent here, but there was a woman who killed herself while we were in Beijing. We went to, we had been walking, so our bus, well, the train, actually, I should say, the train took us to Beijing, and the train station was much further away from our hotel than we had initially thought. And we had to walk there for one reason or another. I entirely forget. But anyways, we had to walk to the hotel long distance. We passed multiple buildings. Probably multiple hours later, now we've already gone to the hotel. We've dropped off our bags, and now we're going to explore the city and go walk. We start walking back the same route that we came, and there's this huge, tall apartment building, ginormous. There's a woman laying on the sidewalk who had jumped from the top of that building. She had committed suicide. She was dead. And to see the Chinese people literally walk over her like it was a dead bird or something on the sidewalk, like most people would do here, you know, say there's a dead bird on the sidewalk. Some people might pick it up or try to, you know, put it in a more appropriate place. It was astounding to see Chinese people literally just walk over this woman's body. And it probably wasn't until like 2 hours later that an ambulance, like an actual medical crew, came and took the body away. So a dead body literally just sat there for well over an hour. Well over an hour. My understanding was it was closer to 2 hours. But that lack of appreciation for life was tied then to what we were hearing in regards to some of the studies and the research they were doing with animals, specifically monkeys, which was just really mind-bending. So Dr. Moreau, The Island of Dr. Moreau, the H.G. Wells book that was written in 1896, again, right before the 20th century, also highlights this sort of evil genius character. Now, fast forward, look at, you know, the stuff that then happens in the early 20th century. You know, that this stuff literally comes to fruition, and, you know, we can pretend that the Nazis were doing these terrible experiments, but the Soviets were doing it. Of course, the Americans, the British, all these different countries, you know, every country uses war to do really outrageous, dangerous, and disgusting things, one of which is these experiments that they perform. So, you know, we can point fingers at the Nazis and things that they did in regards to twins or research on whoever they use as for experimentation as subjects, but everybody was engaging in that activity. And so it's very interesting that a lot of that stuff is fulfilled in the 20th century at a very literal way by institutional power like governments, where this archetype, this narrative is really getting developed in the 19th century with somebody like a Mary Shelley and Frankenstein in the early 1818. And then we see somebody in H.G. Wells with Dr. Moreau in 1896. So I think that's really, really interesting. Again, you guys can look at the archetype, you know, look at evil geniuses. There's so many I could go on. You could look at Dexter's Laboratory, Pinky and the Brain, look at all the different James Bond villains. You could look at, what's the guy's name? Dr. Octavius, or the octopus guy in Spider-Man who develops the arms that he can use. He's an inventor. He's like a nuclear physicist or something, and he can move these arms with his mind, and then there's an accident that happens and he can't take the arms off anymore. And so we see the same archetype present, right? The evil genius. And I could have gone on for days just trying to, you know, just talking about specific evil geniuses, but I thought it'd be more useful to just give a general description, and then whatever you guys, because some of you guys are really wrapped up in comics, which I'm not. Some of you guys are really wrapped up in movies and entertainment, which I'm not. So I'm more of an outsider. I don't read comics. I hardly watch movies, period, ever. So not my wheelhouse. But I think there's a lot going on here, generally speaking. So one of the studies, before we get into the villain archetypes, one of the studies that I found astonishing was a research that was done in the UK regarding films between 1930 and 1980. And so this 50-year window, this 50-year period, they looked at 1,000 films and saw that 30% of the 1,000 films, that the villain in the movie was a sort of mad scientist character. He was either a sort of an evil genius or a mad scientist. And then it showed that almost 40% of the movies had like the character, the thing that the movie was really worried about was some type of invention, was a scientific novelty of some sort. Something was created, something was invented. And so 30% there is the evil villain was a scientist or a mad scientist. Almost 40%, maybe it wasn't about a mad scientist, but it was about a scientific creation. And only 11% of the 1,000 films portrayed scientists as the hero. And so I think that's really interesting because, again, think about that historical period between 1930 and 1980. You're including World War II. You're including the Cold War. You're including a major, a radical increase in the availability of like public technology, right? This is the TV, radio, all this stuff really gets going. Well, radio already existed, but multiple things. The automobile industry, public air transportation. Not that cars already existed, airplanes already existed. Just the development from 1930 to 1980. So I thought that was really interesting. The last portion here that I want to get into with you guys is Pano said, did you say not my wheelhouse? Question mark. Yes, I actually did say that. Oh, Hunter, thank you very much, brother. He threw in 14 pounds, $14.99, and he just threw in 3 Orthodox crosses. Thank you very much, Hunter. Hope you're still watching, brother. I really appreciate that. wasn't checking the super chats when I was going earlier, so I apologize if you're no longer watching the stream. I'm sorry I didn't give you the shout out you deserved in the appropriate fashion. Pano, I just saw his and I just pulled him up. So, thank you very much, Pano. Yes, those are certainly not in my wheelhouse. That's for sure. But the villain archetype section. So this is the last section I wanted to talk about. And I wanted to say that, again, I've presented who Lucifer is, Lucifer's fall into who Satan is, how this is related to pride and the worship of oneself, how pride then is understood in a sort of biblical context, and then how that is related to the evil genius or the mad scientist archetype. And now we've talked about the mad scientist and the evil genius archetype. And I want to talk about then the archetypes of the evil villain. So this is going to include 4 main structures. So the villain archetype. And the first one is the false donor archetype. And so feel free in the comment section or the chat right here, if you guys, if something comes into mind, feel free to throw it in the chat and we'll hash things out. But who maybe fills this description for you most readily, immediately, and your approximation? So the villain archetype of the false donor is it's a villain who appears beneficent, usually to the protagonist, usually to a general amount of people. Of course, the video or the film usually has already showed you that maybe their inner intentions are not so pure. But the villain uses a beneficent appearance, but uses trickery to get usually the protagonist to accept a deal benefiting the villain long term. And so, so many thoughts, you can go with that, but usually it's the idea is that the evil person is not so nice. Most people think they're nice, and then they go and they get the sort of unknowing protagonist, the sort of good-hearted person who always does right, but and doesn't really know better, sort of naive. They get them to accept a deal that benefits that individual in the short term, but in the long term benefits the villain. And so this false donor archetype, again, it probably fits with so many different people out there. Thinking movie, I see Bill Gates and David Rockefeller, John D. Rockefeller, for sure. But even within movies, generally speaking, you can think of the false donor. No, that is great. I didn't even think about Bill Gates, about the false donor, but that's kind of what the vaccine is it's a proposition which seems to benefit the individual in the short term, right? Immunity, let's say to COVID, and then in the long term, who knows what that's going to do to your system. So actually, I think that's a great play by Thoughts of a Pilgrim. Mentioned Gil Bates. Oh, it sounds like Dozo Mode. He also said this. So shout out to Dozo Mode and the Thoughts of a Pilgrim. And Jethro, Bill Gates for sure. Yeah, that does absolutely fit Bill Gates. I was thinking of, in terms of movies, a lot of, sort of the villain that would fit that, but Bill Gates absolutely does. But interestingly enough, if you look into the false donor villain archetype, they also talk about how this really comes from the devil, and the whole narrative, the sort of Faustian deal, right? The selling of your soul, the making a deal with the devil, this whole structure. So the idea is that the literary genre and the multiplicity of motifs and sort of archetypes across literature and art related to the false donor villain figure is actually sort of rooted in the concept of the devil, and the devil not hiding himself as a beneficent figure, although he can to some, usually presents individuals, righteous men, godly men, or whoever, with a deal that would benefit them in the short term, but then benefits the devil in the long term. And that's what the selling of the soul is, right? If we look at Hollywood and various celebrities essentially engaging in very degenerate and sinister activity for the promotion of their career or whatever, they get a immediate or sort of short-term reward but there is a long-term price to pay in regards to the destruction of their own soul for even engaging in those activities that then as Orthodox we would come in with the concept of the noose and all this stuff. So we would go in a little bit of a different direction than some people, but you get what I'm talking about. And that is the false donor villain archetype. The false donor, they come and they pretend to be beneficent. They usually offer the protagonist a deal of some sort. The deal looks good. Usually the protagonist is naive in one way or another. They accept the deal. The deal benefits them short term, but turns out they've been tricked due to the villain and have accepted a deal that benefits the villain long term. And based on what I read, this actually comes from a sort of archetypal understanding of the devil. So that's the first one, false donor. The second villain archetype is the archetype of the beast. And the beast is a little bit different. Of course, that's also who we refer to Satan as, right? The dragon, the beast, the serpent. And so it's all these things are sort of tied together. Like all four of these villain archetypes, I think, again, are all rooted within the devil, all rooted in Satan, despite scholars trying to say, oh, it's just the false donor archetype. All of them are. But the beast, what's unique about the beast is a character whose intentions aren't easily seen. So it's not like you know the obvious intentions of this individual. It's not always a person. It can be like a monster, like a Godzilla, like it's literally a beast. And it acts without any concern for others, no concern for life, for morality, for right and wrong. And its main objective is mass destruction, chaos, and usually murder. And so the beast is just this grotesque thing. It can be an individual. It can be more of a monster. It can be more of a fictional character, whatever it is. But the beast, that archetype, it's not that it is real heady. It's not that it is going to present a deal or use immense trickery. It's not about trickery. It's literally about head-to-head, absolute destruction, murder, chaos. And because it's not interested in normal dialogue or conversation or communication, its intentions are a little bit more ambiguous. It's a little bit more unseen. You don't exactly know why this character or this thing's doing what it's doing compared to other characters or protagonists. So that is the beast. And of course, again, relating it back to the devil, why I see all this stuff is connected. The beast, Satan himself, what's its ultimate goal? It's the false donor. Yes, Satan will allow you to sell yourself to himself, but also it's the beast. It's for ultimate chaos. It's for ultimate destruction. It's for the ultimate loss of life. It's literally for human sacrifice. It doesn't care about life. It doesn't care about morality. It doesn't care about a lot of stuff, and that the beast, again, to me, it's like another dimension of what we understand as Satan to be. And we may say, yeah, this is just one form of an archetype of a villain, but Satan is like the archetype of the archetype, if you will. So that's the beast. The next one is the authority figure. Now, this is more of the sort of James Bond villain, right? You may get the sort of false donor villain in a James Bond. You don't usually get the beast villain. So usually you don't get somebody that's not, that doesn't have more mystique to him, because the beast isn't going to have a whole lot of mystique, right? The beast archetype, it can be a person. It's just that their goal is ultimate destruction and chaos. That's it. It's not real subtle. It's not real complex. It's not a sophisticated analysis of this or that. The beast is just about ultimate destruction. Now, the authoritative figure archetype of the villain is a villain who is a professional in one way or another. They might be a playboy. They might be a millionaire. They might be at the top of a CEO of a corporation. There's something of which they're already at the height of a sort of hierarchy or sort of a pyramid structure, whatever you want to look at it as. That the authority figure, they're already there, and they have an insatiable appetite for power. So whether they have all the money, all the wealth, they have the corporation, they have this, maybe they have part of a country or something, but they always have an insatiable appetite for more. And so the authority figure is a villain who is a professional in one way or another, but has an insatiable hunger for more power and wants total domination through any means necessary. Any means necessary. And so I think this is probably, like if you're just going to look at James Bond, probably more symbolic of the sort of James Bond evil villain figures is that they're authoritative figures. They're authoritative figures. They're competent. They've been successful in one way or another. Even like I would say Victor Frankenstein is a sort of authority figure, right? It's not like he's making a false donor. And even Victor Frankenstein is a sympathetic figure in the movie or in the book Frankenstein, right? So even in the book Frankenstein, about the monster Frankenstein created by Dr. Victor Frankenstein, he's sort of a sympathetic figure. The doctor is. But so maybe he's not the best character to use, but take most other evil geniuses or mad scientists, they mostly are the authoritative figure, because if you're a mad scientist or an evil genius, you're already competent. You're already at the height or of a particular hierarchy or pyramid structure. So some of the ways in which when you look at the authority figure, sometimes they're very prominent magicians. So if you look at like the Lord of the Rings and you look at the battle between Gandalf and the other wizard, I'm not entirely sure. I don't exactly remember what his name was, but he would definitely fit the authority figure archetype, because again, who does Gandalf go to get advice from? Who does he appeal to? Well, he appeals to this other wizard. Now again, I'm not promoting, pagan witchcraft and druidry, because I'm talking about Gandalf or anything like that. So I don't want to get any emails because of that. But he is the sort of authority figure. He's competent in magic. He's competent in knowledge. He's a competent, authoritative figure. He's at the height of a pyramid, but he wants more, right? He wants the desolation of the forest. He wants all this stuff. He wants more and more and more. So that is the authoritative figure villain archetype. And then the last archetype of the villain archetypes is the traitor. And I couldn't think of probably the one of the better traitor archetypes. I was thinking of the guy in the Matrix who, with the mustache. Somebody's going to know his name in the chat, and feel free to throw that down there. I totally forget his name. The guy in the Matrix with the mustache who they thought ends up dying, but then, at the end of like episode 2, it turns out he's still alive, and they recover him and they bring him back on the ship, and then he wrecks everything. I forget what that guy's name is, but he totally fulfills what's called the traitor archetype. And so the traitor archetype, in terms of villain archetypes, is a villain who portrays the protagonist, often supplying information or working for the opponents, usually in exchange for freedom, security, or wealth. So I also think of like the movie 300. And the sorry. Let me get a drink real quick. Woo! Got me right in the throat there. You look at the movie 300 and the hunchback figure who goes and works for Xerxes, provides information on where the Spartans are, how you get behind that sort of rock formation, you can attack them from behind. So the traitor archetype, this is what's really interesting about it, is it's not always like the hunchback. So this is really a better example. He doesn't have evil intentions, right? He wanted to be a Roman Spartan soldier. Leonidas isn't going to let him because he can't lift up his shield with his left arm. And he's frustrated because, to a degree, he knows that Leonidas is right, yet he wants to be a Roman soldier. Now, he's not evil, right? The hunchback guy's not evil. He's a good guy. He wants to be part of the group, but he's not allowed to be part of the group. And so he ends up going to Xerxes, providing information for his own freedom, right? To attain wealth or power. These are usually what the exchange mechanisms are. Cipher, that's exactly it. Armand, Cipher, yes. Thank you. Um, so you don't always know what their goals are, but not always. So the traitor, their intentions are not always evil intentions, but actions committed to reach their ultimate goals are inherently evil. And so I would say the betrayal of Leonidas, how when he goes and sees Xerxes, he's kind of seduced by the naked women, the sort of magic, the degeneracy, really, just all this stuff that's sort of swarming around Xerxes' tent. And Xerxes stands there and forces him to bow and show obedience to him. He does that, and then he gets things in exchange. And that traitor is the fourth sort of villain archetype, which also, I think, as Armand Zahidi says, and thank you very much, brother, for time that's what Cypher does in The Matrix. He's kind of that figure. Now, it's a little bit different, but I would say similar. So what are those again? Those are the four villain archetypes. They are the false donor, the villain who pretends to be beneficent, but then he offers the protagonist a deal that seems to benefit the protagonist in the short term, but ultimately benefits the villain in the long term. That's the false donor archetype, and that is related usually to the devil. That's where scholars think, it comes from the devil, selling your soul, the whole Faustian deal, stuff like that. The second villain archetype is the beast. The beast is all about destruction, mayhem, chaos, murder, the intentions of the beast. Why are they doing this? Why is it doing this? Why is he doing this? It's a little ambiguous. Nobody's really sure. But what is sure is the total lack of appreciation of life and the total intent on destruction and chaos. That is the second villain archetype, the beast. And then the third villain archetype is the authority figure, the figure who's already at the top of the pyramid, who can't get enough, and they want more. And so they will do anything by any means possible to get more and more power. And so what I forgot to say, again, on the third one and the fourth one, is how that relates to Satan. And the third one, the authority figure, I mean, that is absolutely Satan. Satan is at the top of the pyramid of creation, meaning of this fallen created world. He sits at the top of that pyramid. He has dominion. He has real power and authority. And he still wants more. He still wants more power. He wants more people to be involved in sin. He wants more people to be engaged and in opposition to God's will. He wants more people to lose their soul or their inheritance within eternal life. All these different things. So again, the fourth archetype of the villain figure is a perfect description of Satan himself from a different angle, right? Satan presents the false deal, the false donor, selling your soul to the devil. Satan is the beast. He is the beast. He is the dragon. He is set on total destruction, chaos, murder, and the transgressing of all these things. And then he also is the authoritative figure. He is at the top of hierarchies. He is the one who everybody, wants to be, and yet he wants more. He's not satisfied. And then the fourth one, the traitor archetype, as we talked about with Cypher, as we talked about with the Hunchback in the movie 300, is Satan the traitor? Well, I certainly think we could portray it that way. Look at him betraying God. Look at the fall of Lucifer. Look at, was Judas inspired by a sort of satanic Luciferian spirit? Maybe. Certainly that could be I'm not sure, actually. I don't know what the church's teaching on that is. I've never heard anybody actually talk about that. Was Judas filled with a sort of demonic spirit? I need to talk to somebody and ask somebody a little bit more sophisticated. But maybe the traitor, again, that traitor archetype fits again for Satan. Maybe it's not as well. I'm not sure. Maybe what are your guys' thoughts? But the traitor archetype seems to work to a degree. I mean, clearly Satan was a traitor to God and his try to usurpation of God's kingdom and the heavenly realm. So I don't know, something interesting there. That basically concludes today's live stream. We've hit on a ton of topics. We began with the fall of Lucifer, and we read from Ezekiel chapter 28. And by the way, thank you guys, everybody who's joined. Thank you very much, guys, who have joined it. Please smash that like button if you haven't. I would greatly appreciate it. So if you could, please smash that like for everybody who's joined. We have covered, again, for all you guys who have just joined, we have covered a ton of different topics today. We began with Lucifer's fall. And so we were talking about Lucifer's fall. We began with Ezekiel chapter 28 and Isaiah chapter 14, both of which describe the fall of Lucifer. Then we got into how Lucifer fell due to his being impressed with his own beauty, being impressed with his own intellect, being impressed with his own power. And that this pride then is the origination of really all sin, but pride is the crux of most sin, if not all sin. It's the head honcho. And so pride then being responsible for Lucifer's fall. And then we talked about pride in a biblical way. I read some passages about pride, talked about how pride related to Adam and Eve, and they're Eve wanting to be like God, right? The original sin of Lucifer then gets Eve to engage in, and then Eve gets Adam to engage in. And then when they're confronted by God about those things, Adam blames Eve blames Satan. And so as soon as you pass the buck in regards to responsibility, that is a sort of prideful act because you don't want yourself to be culpable, which leads further and further into the fall. And so we talked about the biblical passage in Proverbs that talked about how pride brings one low, and sort of the symbolic interpretation of that I thought was really interesting. Pride lowers a person. And we talked about pride being the lamp of the wicked, and how we as followers of Christ or somebody following Christ would be following that light. We're not going to be following the light of pride, which the wicked follow. Then we got into general conversation on archetypes, sparsing out Platonic forms of archetypes, Jungian psychological archetypes, and cross-cultural mythological archetypes, all of which people associate when they say the word archetype, but those three dimensions are actually distinct and separate and need to be enunciated as. That was what we did. And then we got into the evil genius and the mad scientist. We talked about some of the general characteristics, a couple prominent figures, and then we got into villain archetypes. And that really kind of summed it up. And the whole point was to show that the fall of Lucifer falling due to his pride, is really reflective of the archetype of the evil genius, of the mad scientist, of the villain, who has immense intelligence, who's a slave to power and revenge, who wants to transgress moral boundaries, taboos. So Victor Frankenstein wanting to create the Frankenstein monster, various scientists wanting to create life, I think. And then so this easily ties back into transhumanism. It ties back into life extension, right? Even if you look at some of the comic villains, like in comic books, you could pull up like the top 15 villains in comic books. There are scientists interested in life extension. So the fear of death, right? The fear of death. Again, very interesting, because as Christians, we are not to be afraid of death. Death has already been conquered by death, by God taking human form and dying. That one of the things that really propel these evil figures is their fear of death. And I think that's really interesting. And then we got into the various villain archetypes. So quite a bit today. Please hit like button. Please share this if you know anybody who'd be interested. Looks like we got one more super chat. Josh threw in $5. Thank you very much, brother. I really appreciate that. $5 said, "Hi, bro. Any thoughts on evolution, like old age versus young age Earth, specifically carbon dating and other stuff?" So I don't believe in macroevolution. I think that shouldn't be a controversial opinion. In regards to old Earth or young Earth creationism, I need to look more into that topic specifically in regards to have a real my argument for either isn't going to be very nuanced or sophisticated. I'll take the dogmatic, orthodox, biblical perspective, and I'll work from there. But I definitely don't believe in macroevolution due to the mathematical inconsistency. So I don't know if some of you guys are familiar, but even doing computer models, people in the realm of mathematics, this isn't just Christians. A lot of these people are actually atheists, have gone to show, especially within the last, I'd say 3 to 5 years specifically, have shown that macroevolution, macro-Darwinian evolution, makes no sense. There's a few different ways in which you could approach it. One is the way in which E. Michael Jones approaches it in the opening of his new book, Logos Rising, talking about how there's this sort of internal contradiction within macroevolution of the fittest, always trying to attain the fittest structure of whatever it is. So he uses an eyeball or a wing. So how did a wing go from an arm to a wing when the process in the middle would have been detrimental to the survivability and the fitness of that particular species? It really can't account for any of that. Now, it can show different structures of wings, and maybe those different structures of wings amongst different bird species have similarities. But macroevolution really cannot account for the jump between species. Now, it can account for what's called speciation. Speciation is microevolution. Microevolution is that really what they can prove is a sort of differentiation among species. So a hammerhead shark or various shark species, they exude different phenotypes. Those phenotypes are expressed due to the environments in which they live in, allowing them to be more suitable and adaptable to that environment. That's true. My understanding, I definitely believe in microevolution or speciation, right? The two different squirrel species, something you'd learn in like Bio 101, is the two different squirrel species on the opposite side of the Grand Canyon. They were the same species, and then the Grand Canyon began to widen and widen and widen, and now the same squirrel is actually two different species on the opposite sides of the canyon. That's called speciation. I believe in that. Now, how old is the Earth? I need to do my own research so I can make a more sophisticated take on that. Because if I were to right now, I don't really have a good argument. So I'll just take whatever church dogma is, which I think is actually kind of complicated because I don't know. I hear the discussions between death before the fall and people that believe in theistic evolution, and that does seem like a major contradiction. So death before the fall doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense. But I actually don't. Josh, I appreciate the $5, and I hope you get your money's worth hearing me trying to respond to your question. But I just really don't get into it. It's not where I spend most of my time. It's the same thing with the flat earth, round earth. The two topics that I really just haven't got deep into in terms of like a real sophisticated take on is young earth, old earth, and what was the one I just said? I just lost my thread. Flat earth and round earth. Flat earth, round earth, young earth, old earth. I just haven't, maybe that's something that I should do in previous videos, is kind of spend a couple days going down some rabbit holes and seeing my take on some of that stuff. But as of right now, I don't have a, again, we could get into dinosaurs then. I know the different theories, and I know the general arguments for each of the different theories. The false archaeological record of some of these fossils, or how it created a new cottage industry, and allowed itself to perpetuate a false paradigm of history. All this, I'm aware of these ideas, but I just need to do my own deeper investigation and research before I take any public stance on old Earth, young Earth, or flat Earth, round Earth, or dinosaurs. Yeah, those three topics I will leave to the side until I've done a thorough analysis where I feel confident to make public statements about it. So, sorry, Josh, can't answer your question directly, but I hope that helped. And thank you again, brother. Again, thank you, Hunter. I really, really appreciate the $14.99. Pano threw in $2, and fellow Hoosier and brother. So I really appreciate that. And then Josh threw in $5 asking me about thoughts on evolution. So I really appreciate that. If you guys have any more questions, feel free to throw one in here real quick. I'm going to hop off. Again, for anybody who's interested, if you like the content that I produce on this YouTube channel, please go to my website, davidpatrickcarey.com, churchoftheeternallogos.com, and in that top right-hand corner, there's a donate button. And if you guys are able, and if you're interested in, to set a $5 monthly recurring payment up on the website, I would greatly appreciate it. And that will set you up for a member's account. In the next week or two, we will be streaming live from the website, and half our stream. So if I do a stream with Made by Jim Bob or Jay Dyer or Norwegian News or whoever it's with, half of it's going to be free right here on YouTube, right here on D Live, right here on Periscope, wherever you're catching this broadcast at right now. But the other half is actually going to be on my website, davidpatrickcarey.com, churchoftheeternallogos.com, and we're going to be streaming directly from my own server to the website. So only members will be able to witness second half conversations. So that would be an incentive to go over to the website and potentially set up for $5 much as a cup of coffee. You're going to be, and again, I'm going to be giving so much value for that $5 that I promise it will be worth it. That the $5 that you donate every month to get the members account, to get exclusive content through the website, again, all that stuff's coming in the next week or two. It will absolutely be worth it, I promise. So if that's something that you're able to do and that's something you're interested, please check that out. Would greatly appreciate it. So it looks like I'm not seeing any more questions. I'm going to share my D Live account. We got two brothers and sisters over on D Live, probably two brothers. And I'm going to share that link with you guys over here on YouTube. If you guys have a D Live and would like to follow me, just in case something were to happen, please go over, click that link and go over to my D Live and just subscribe or follow. I would greatly appreciate that. And that would at least ensure that next time I stream, if I ever were to, God forbid, get kicked off YouTube for bringing a little too much truth, that you'd be able to catch me over on D Live, and eventually you can always just go to the website. So the reason why we're moving to the website thing is, say I were to get kicked off YouTube, I want it to be that you can catch my streams anytime, anywhere by just going to my website. So even if I was kicked off all platforms, you could still watch my streams over at my website. So if you can, check it out, davidpatrickcarey.com, churchoftheeternallogos.com, and just make that $5 donation in the top right corner. Would greatly appreciate it. But anyways, thank you guys for all the love and support. I truly appreciate it. We'll be coming out with certainly another stream this week, potentially two. My goal, I'm shooting for one, maybe two by Thursday. That's the goal. So anyways, thank you guys for all the love and support. I truly appreciate it. Hope everybody had a great weekend. Hope everybody had a great time at Divine Liturgy yesterday. Hopefully everybody's still going to church if you're able to. And, Lord have mercy, singing along with the liturgy. So anyways, guys, thank you very much. Matt McNasty said email list. Yeah, Matt McNasty, if you go to my website, davidpatrickcarey.com, just wait for 20 seconds. The email list will pop up. If you just put your email in there, you'll be on the list. So that's an easy way to hop on there. But yeah, Dyer got married. Yeah, congratulations to Jay Dyer, by the way, guys. Congratulations to Jay Dyer on getting married. Wonderful thing. God bless him. And God bless their relationship, and hopefully, it lasts throughout time. So God bless Jay and his beautiful wife. So anyways, with that being said, guys, I am getting out of here. I'm going to enjoy the rest of my night, and you guys will see me either probably Wednesday and Thursday this week. So keep your eyes peeled. I will see you guys around. Have an excellent evening. And as always, until next time, God bless.